Hello and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files, where we are going to do a sound quality shootout on John Coltrane's Blue Train. And I am very excited about this release, the new release. For those of you who don't know, Blue Note has just released two versions of Blue Train as part of their Tone Poet series. One version is stereo that also has some outtakes and session recordings from the time that didn't get released at the time. And then they also have a mono version that they released as well. And I'm going to talk about both of them a little bit today. And let's go into the versions that I've demoed for the sound quality shoot. I will say that this one, this album itself, is actually probably one of my favorite jazz albums of all times. It's one of my earliest album purchases of jazz that I purchased. And then what I mean by that is I had bought a lot of collections, like the Miles Davis box set back in the 90s, I think it was, and a John Coltrane collection from Rhino and a few others. But this was one of my earliest regular album purchases that I made. It's great recording, and I used to use it as a demo when I used to sell stereo equipment back in the day. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart, so I had to definitely get both variations of the release. So and hear how they compared. So without further ado, let's go over the ones that I have. Now, admittedly, embarrassingly enough, I guess I could say, I don't have a ton of record versions of this. I have a couple of digital versions, including Super Audio CD, and I believe I've got for lack of a better word, I don't think it's technically called a deluxe edition, but a deluxe edition, if you will, that had these outtakes on it. But I don't have a ton of variations on it, but especially on record. What I do have is are pretty good versions of it. Maybe not the quintessentials by some people's standards, but still very good ones. So let's go over it. These are the three that I listened to for the sound quality shootout. So the first one is the new stereo release. This is the one, like I said, that has two records. They call it the Complete Masters. And it has I'll even open it up here so you can take a look. It's actually got a booklet on the inside, which is kind of nice, that you normally don't get with this release. So some essays, and I think there's a picture of the master tapes in here somewhere. Yeah, there you go. So pretty cool stuff. And so that was the Tone Poet stereo version. And here is the Tone Poet mono version that I also got. No bonus material on this because I don't think they ever mixed the other stuff down to mono, but I don't know. Maybe someone can help answer that one here. But the last one I did, I did a sound quality shootout with, is I believe it's a 1961 copy, but it is a very early pressing of this. Rudy Van Gelder actually cut it. I believe it's got the West 61st Street address on it, if you can see that. So I got that several years ago. It's not in the greatest of condition, but it sounds better than it looks. So, I mean, if you were to visually grade it, it's probably like VG minus maybe, but I'd say it plays pretty close to a VG plus. So anyway, that being said, I want to talk some about the stereo versus the mono. This is actually my first time hearing the mono, surprisingly enough. I had never heard the mono until I got this Tone Poet. And I would say that I do like the mono version. It's very good sounding, and it's got great clarity, and they did a great job. I think it sounds great. I don't have another mono copy to compare, but this one sounds really good. In comparison to the stereo, in terms of sound quality, it's probably pretty similar. But obviously the differences between stereo and mono are pretty pretty obvious, and we'll go into that in a second here. So when comparing it to the stereo, I think in some ways, I definitely still like the stereo better. And I mean, the one complaint that I would have overall on the stereo one is the reverb or echo that's typically mostly in the left channel is a little bit, maybe gives it a little bit of a lack of cohesiveness because of that. And I think that is about the biggest complaint I have. And you know, the fact that there's very little, if anything, in the dead center of the recording on the stereo mix is kind of a one of those things that's a little bit on the disappointing side too, if I have to nitpick. But I still think I prefer the stereo because it still gives you a little bit of a wider, you know, obviously you got the wider sound stage, you get a little bit of a better separation between the instruments and things like that. So I definitely would say that I would lean more towards a stereo mix overall, even with its, you know, shortcomings, for lack of a better word. So now that I've got that out of the way, let's talk about the 1961 version versus the Tone Poet. I basically demoed two songs, or I listened to two songs back and forth to compare. I did Blue Train and Locomotion, and I chose Blue Train mainly because that is, in my opinion, kind of the go-to track on this. It's probably my favorite track on the album. But Locomotion I chose because of the kind of a little bit of a drum solo that there is sort of near the end, and it kind of gives you a good idea of how much of a snappiness or dynamic range there is to the recording when you listen to it. So here are the differences I found between the two. The original definitely sounds good. You know, it's got a decent sound stage to it. There's definitely you can hear the differential between like the different horns in the left channel, for example. You know, the drums, you know, the mix obviously is going to be the same on both. But, you know, overall clarity is pretty decent. When I played the Tone Poet, the big differences that I noticed between it and the original or early, the 1961, is the soundstage was much wider, which in some cases I like, but in this one, if I have to nitpick, I'd say that might be a drawback to the Tone Poet, because I think it gives a little bit less cohesiveness to the incident I talked about before with the echo and the reverb in the left channel. It kind of separates that more and makes that more obvious. So I think it becomes a little bit less cohesive in that sense. Again, kind of nitpicking. But there's definitely an overall better, a wider frequency range, you know, higher highs, lower lows than the 61 version. So, you know, there are advantages in that sense. So, you know, this one is definitely and obviously cut with an audiophile in mind, because it's going to give you the wider sound stage. I don't think it's really any deeper per se, just wider, and then the more of a full frequency range to it. So here's what my take on it. You know, I think I like the mono, but it's definitely third place for me. If you're a big mono person and you don't like kind of that cohesiveness that gets lost, like I mentioned in the stereo mixes, like it can on this one, then it might be your go-to, because you certainly don't get that with the mono mix. But I guess I would, if you want a little bit more of the cohesiveness that's going on, I think you'd probably lean more towards the early pressing, because it's going to be a narrower sound stage, and so that separation between the echo and reverb and let's say the drums are the biggest reason, are going to be less noticeable or less more cohesive than it is on, let's say, the Tone Poet. But the Tone Poet definitely has the better frequency range, and, you know, obviously the wider soundstage, which can be better. I'm not sure if it is on this one, but I definitely like the quality of sound on the Tone Poet from the frequency, you know, the EQ settings and things like that, from that aspect of it, over the 61. So there you have it. I would say that, you know, the Tone Poet's got more treble. So if you're not a huge treble person, probably want to lean towards the older or earlier pressings. And if you want that a little bit more cohesiveness, again, maybe the earlier pressings. But if you want that wider sound stage and the more full frequency range, then you definitely want to go with the new one. And the new one's awesome too, because, well, number one, it's probably significantly cheaper than an early pressing, but it also includes all those, the second record full of outtakes and session, extra session recordings and things like that too. So you kind of get a little bit of a bonus there. It's definitely going to be your best value. So the Tone Poet, I would say that, if you're on the fence on it, I would get it because it sounds great. Not only because of the full frequency range and the wider soundstage if you like that, but also the second record of extras. So that is everything I have to say about it. What are your thoughts? I know there's some Music Matters versions. I think there's a Classic Records reissue, and I kind of would love to hear your takes if you have any of those and you've compared it to maybe the ones that I have, the 61 and the new Tone Poet. I did have a 75th anniversary reissue version of it, but it was just too noisy. The pressing was bad. The cutting was pretty decent, but it was just the pressing was just way too noisy. So I didn't listen to it in comparison to these two. But I do recall liking the earlier pressing versus that 75th anniversary issue. So even though that the actual mastering is good on that, it's just it's a very noisy record because it was pressed at URP, Universal Record Pressing, I believe it's called, which I don't like. So anyway, love to hear your take. Do you have the Classic Records or Music Matters versions, and have you compared it to maybe some early pressings and the new Tone Poet? I'd love to hear your take on that. So if you liked what you saw here, hit that like button. If you want to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to know when my new videos come out, hit that alert bell. Also, I'm on social media. I've got a True Audiophiles Facebook group. I am also on Instagram and Twitter too. So you can check me out there. I've got some links in the description as well to do that. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day and week, and I will talk to you again soon. Thank you very much.